Move to receive a report on Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and their purchase of the 4 Delta Islands, Bacon, Holland, Webb, and Bolden. Chairman Randy Record and Stephen Arakawa are here from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Randy is already at the podium. Thank you, Randy, for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance earlier. Little business item. I have a handful of speaker cards. There's more coming in. On this item, I will limit public speaking to 2 minutes so we can get through our agenda swiftly this evening, but still allow opportunity for the public to comment. So I have, 9 or 10 speaker cards, 2 minutes each on these speakers following Mr. Record and Mr. Arakawa's presentations. Randy, welcome and good evening.
Thank you. Chair Pifo, I appreciate the opportunity.
We need the Eric microphone that needs to be raised for Randy's height, or we don't want you to have to stoop, Randy. That would not be nice. You can go into your rock star mode.
Okay. I don't have this is Steve, for Steve. And just to give you a warning, I'll be happy to answer a few questions at the end of my brief comments, unless they're too technical or too controversial, and then Steve will handle those. But again, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate being here. I hope this is the first of many discussions that we have in the future. A little bit about myself. I'm a farmer from Southern California. My family's been farming since the 1920s. We know about Metropolitan because they came through our valley and impacted our water supply. We were able to, as a community, deal with Metropolitan, formed a water district, Eastern Municipal Water District, that I am currently the president of and am their representative to the Met Board. I used to farm carrots, onions, potatoes. Now I farm wine grapes in Paso Robles. My daughter manages that vineyard for our family. I'm very proud of that, and that area certainly has its water issues. Metropolitan has half the state's population in its service area. We used to get about 4% of the water that flows through the Delta. That's been impacted lately because of biological opinions and obviously unprecedented drought. We want to get back to that 4%. We can make really good use of that high quality water. It helps us in our recycling. It helps us have a reliable supply for what we need to do in Southern California. We're not after more water. We're after a more reliable supply. We know that the future for Southern California is local resources. Metropolitan in the last couple of years has increased the subsidy they pay to member agencies from $240 an acre foot to $350 an acre foot for things like recycled water, groundwater desal. My agency has made good use of that program over the years, and we have water supplies available that we would not have without Metropolitan. Metropolitan also committed $450 million to conservation, mainly in turf removal over the last couple of years. That has been successful. There's still a ways to go there. We're in a pilot project with LA County sanitation districts to build a treatment plant to start utilizing water that's now being discharged to the ocean. We think there's a lot of potential there. So we're very aggressive on local projects, and we know that that's where we will meet the growth demands in the future. As far as the Delta Islands go, I'm not going to try to dance around this. If there is a project to build a couple of tunnels, one of these islands will be very strategic as far as staging, as far as where the spoils go. It will take some cost off the project and some time. But when I advocated to the Met Board to purchase these islands, I said that if we don't get that project, I think these islands are even more important. We need to be here to try to help figure out what's going on here as far as the ecosystem is concerned. We want to be part of a process that helps get things back on track. I'm a farmer. I know what it's like to not have water. I think most of California doesn't know that, although we may be getting closer to that. I don't want to impact negatively the farming that's going on in the Delta. There will be some changes, most likely, at some point, not right away. We're not doing anything different at this point. We're not terminating any leases. We're not participating in levee districts or ferry districts, it's business as usual at the moment. We have done many pilot projects in the past on restoration in the Delta, so we have a good idea of what we think will work. But we're open to partnerships. We're open to ideas. We want to be good partners going forward. I've had conversations with Karen Ross at CDFA. I've had conversations with Randy Fiorini at the Stewardship Council. We got a support letter from the Nature Conservancy, from Point Blue Conservation Science, from Ducks Unlimited, from Audubon, California. We're very pleased at the support that we seem to be getting and the idea that there are a lot of organizations that would like to partner with us on the use of these islands. So we're very excited about moving forward. And as I said, I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have in the near future. And as I said, I'd be happy to answer a few questions before Steve comes up to do his presentation, if you have any.
Thank you, Randy. And I think one question that's important to local governments, particularly the 5 Delta counties, but specifically Contra Costa and San Joaquin, is the tax base. And if you see the acquisition of the islands is having a negative effect on the property tax revenue to the counties within the jurisdiction that the islands are located, meaning you're a government agency, will the existing tax base be altered by your acquisition of the islands?
Well, unfortunately, if it's altered, it's probably going to go up because...
well, that wouldn't be unfortunate.
Well, what we paid for the islands is more than what I would imagine that their assessed valuation is for the particular counties. We have every intention of paying property taxes, so that won't change.
So the acquisition has a higher land assessment value than its currently assessed. You're seeing an additional revenue to the counties would be...
Well, that's how it works in most counties. I mean, I don't think you need to rush to raise the taxes, but obviously we paid more than what I think has been the norm for property in that area. So theoretically, I think the assessed valuation goes up.
And as I understand it, since the properties you've acquired are outside of your service area, that you're required to continue to pay those property taxes.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the Commission? Commissioner Vice Chairman Thompson.
Thank you, Chair.
Red, green light. Nope.
There we go. Thank you, and Mr. Record, thank you for attending our meeting. I'm Supervisor Skip Thompson from Solano County. And in my neighborhood, when someone moves into the neighborhood, we go over and greet him or her, and we take them a pie or a cake. I didn't get a pie or a cake, but I have a brownie for you, and I'd like to have you accept it on behalf of my wanting to be a good neighbor as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I should have brought something with me.
Some of that wine from Paso Robles would have been nice.
Okay.
You talked about a ongoing conversation with the council or the commission and others in the area that have a concern about what Met is doing and what's happening in the Delta. This is more than a region to many of us sitting at this table. It's more than plumbing. It's more than where muck is going to be deposited. And we hope you as a new neighbor come to understand and realize what the Delta really means to not only us, but the state as a whole. Even with the proposed tunnels, the Delta has impacted my county in many ways. A lot of the eco-restore projects are slated in Solano County, affecting, you talked about being a farmer. Think about all the eco-restore sorts of projects that are going to be situated in a small county like mine. And Solano County has gone to great lengths to support ag and protect it. And then with what's happening in the Delta now, it's very concerning. And so we'd like you to be a good neighbor. I've shared with you how we treat our neighbors when they come into our neighborhood. And I hope you would recognize that we'd like to be partners in any efforts that happen in the Delta. We've been asked this from the state agencies for a long time. But I do have a couple questions for you, and one I think is pretty concerning to me and some of my colleagues at the table. And we'd like to know if there's any discussions with the state agencies about them acquiring the islands that you referenced early on in your presentation.
I'm not aware of that, and I'm probably not the right person to ask that question at this point.
Well, I'll let some of my colleagues.
All right.
answer.
Any other Assemblymember Frazier?
Thank you. As you stated, you've bought thousands of acres in these islands, and there's a lot of ag in production on these islands. What would be the taking that component out of the economy in our area, the jobs, the ag component, that if you're using it for different uses, have you factored in the mitigation that would need to take place in the Delta economy?
Well, I think once there is a project presented to us and we take a vote at Metropolitan on whether or not we're going to go forward, then once we know what the project is, then that will be the time to talk about that. As far as farming itself, I envision that there will be a different kind of farming going on, hopefully with the same farmers if they want to do that. For an example, we have a project that's been going on for several years where we're planting native tules to help reverse subsidence, take the oxidation and turn it into carbon sequestration rather than carbon release. We're going to need some assistance either from the state or the federal government in order to make that profitable for a farmer. But to me, it makes perfect sense. I think it would be a benefit to some of those islands that have pretty deep subsidence, a benefit to the state's goals of carbon sequestration. That's one example of how I think we could go forward in a mutually beneficial manner.
So you've acquired these islands without any kind of a general plan going forward, just you've acquired them because you know that there might be a need down the road. What I'm asking you, is there any kind of draft plan that's been put on before you bought these islands? You just bought them on speculation? We need some tangible, what kind of is the intent?
Well, I think we all know that the ecosystem in the Delta is not what it used to be, and there needs to be some changes in order to get that back on track. We've got fish species that are in decline, and that's not to the benefit of anyone. What exactly we do to change that, I'm not sure, but we've done a lot of work in science, spent a lot of money on that. We've done some pilot projects, as I mentioned. We want to try that on a bigger scale. The response that we've gotten from other agencies, NGOs, organizations in the Delta and wanting to work with us leads me to believe that there's great potential to see that happen.
Thank you.
Commissioner Natoli.
Good evening, Randy. Thanks for spending time with us this evening and for certainly your leadership in the area of water. I kind of want to follow up on the point you made just a moment ago, because, again, there's been speculation about what happens next, and I think certainly you've done your best to address the questions that have been posed previously. But I guess where I think it becomes potentially problematic certainly for counties who have, a tremendous stake certainly in not only the Delta, but obviously in agriculture and recreation and the environment. And when I heard you reference that, it might be a different type of farming, that, somehow tules is going to be considered farming, that says to me, again, I recognize what you're saying, that there'll be some value there for carbon credits and so forth, but in order to have tules, you've got to have wetted areas. Again, I'm not a biologist, but and that says to me, and again, I know the state has embarked on some pilot projects in areas in Sacramento County and on Sherman Island in particular, in Twitchell, I believe. And it concerns me that lands that have historically, certainly since the time that areas were settled and reclaimed, have been in different cropping patterns or maybe subsidence and so forth. But if that's the approach that's being considered, I would say that to Mary and Skip's earlier questions and Jim's as well, I think there needs to be some conversation, not that we can tell farmers or anybody else what crops they can farm or not, if they're the property owner, but I do think that it poses some threshold questions as it relates to the farm economy, and it's not just about dollars, but it's about crops and what's produced in the Delta and the variety of crops and so forth. And and some of those lands may be suitable. But I guess the question I want to ask you then is if you weren't considering flooding islands, is it the thought is that you're going to wet those islands year-round with tule marsh?
It's an example of what we could do to try to change what's currently going on in the Delta. Don, I don't know about how much water it would take. I don't have any of the details. I'm just talking about a proposal that might be mutually beneficial. Obviously, we're happy to talk about the particulars as we get down the road, and staff's better prepared to do that than I am. But welcome the conversation and the input.
Okay, well, good, and I appreciate it. Again, I just not to put questions that difficult to answer this evening because a lot of those answers aren't even known yet. But I do think that my point being, I think in your response that I think ongoing dialogue and conversations with you and your district and Met as the landowner, and obviously with the the interest that we all have, and obviously seeing a healthy prosperous Delta from various vantage points. I think it'll be very important as you go forward with planning, and certainly not only talking with the affected counties, but I think with this commission. And so I appreciate you being here this evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Wynn. Make sure you push so your green light comes on. There.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for coming up here and sharing some of your insights and certainly the direction that Metropolitan's taken. One of the things that Supervisor Natali and Villegas and Thompson and FIFA and myself, we also serve on the Delta Counties Coalition. And obviously we have a lot of discussions. In fact, tomorrow we're having a forum in regards to water in general, not necessarily just the water fix. But, we talk about the tunnels and a lot of things, and obviously we can divide up and take sides. But I guess I'm more interested because of all the things that are going on in regards to audits and reports and those types of things, to consider if, for example, the water fix never happens, it's never built. So what's the next step? What's the alternative? What can happen after that? And I would offer this, is that based upon the Delta counties, and last week I was in Washington, D.C. with my fellow supervisors from the San Joaquin Valley, from Kern to San Joaquin. And also I've dealt with the mountain counties from Tuolumne up to El Dorado and Placer counties. And even the northern counties, it's interesting to me that when you talk to county supervisors, that there are literally regions that have a kind of a different perspective on water. If you go north, where they had a lot of water, in fact, they're bucketfuls, and they can't use it all. And so they've even talked about ways to convey that water farther south to the benefit of certainly Delta counties and even to Southern California. The mountain counties are dealing with forest management, forest fires, those types of things. But they're the watershed counties which supply us with the water which ultimately goes south. And they need help. The Delta counties, obviously, we talk about the Delta and the levees and those types of things, and certainly those need some assistance also. But I would offer this, that there are enough different regions that have different resources, advantages, disadvantages, that if we were able to take this entire state and all 58 counties, I think we could come up with a pretty good plan that would benefit from Northern California to Southern California, because there are systems, and you alluded to a couple in regard to recycling, desalination, those types of things. We have pressurized irrigation systems here in San Joaquin County. We have other measures that we're using, underground storage. The county's working with East Bay Mud on a project. And so all I'm saying is that there's a lot of tools in the toolbox that, and you mentioned earlier in your presentation about discussions, partnerships, collaboration. And I would like to, as opposed to waiting to see, what the end result's going to be of the water fix, I don't think it would hurt to have some of those preliminary discussions to look at, okay, if this doesn't happen, what else is available, certainly to benefit our area, but also to benefit the valley and all Southern California. So I would be encouraged if we could start those discussions, at least preliminarily, and look at all the tools in the toolbox that are available, because the bottom line is, the $16 billion or whatever it happens to be would certainly go a long ways in regards to participatory investment amongst various regions to build a system which could be the state of the art. If you look at all the countries around the world in different states, there are systems that are extremely effective and beneficial with less water than we have. So I would certainly entertain opportunities to have those discussions and certainly look to the future.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. I would look forward to that.
Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you. You're aware recently, and thank you to the Restore the Delta folks for the Public Records Act request and the information that came as a result of that. For as long as I can remember, the administration has been saying there will be no taxpayer dollars to be used for the tunnels. And now we have a cost analysis, preliminary, it certainly is, says that the federal government or the taxpayer is going to be asked to pony up as much as 1/3 of the cost of $16 billion. Have you had any discussions on your board about whether you're going to have to increase your rates to pay for the tunnels?
Oh, sure. Talk about it all the time.
But do you have a serious talk about it? Because $16 billion is a lot of rate increases.
It's a lot of money. We do have half the state's population. As I mentioned, we think it's about $5 a household per month if the project is $14 to $16 billion. And we don't think that's too much to ask for a more reliable water supply.
Okay, time will tell.
Yeah.
All right. Randy, thank you so much. There's a slide presentation behind me.
Steve's gonna do that.
He's going to go through that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Steve Arakawa is our Bay Delta guy. And
Awesome.
again,
Well, don't go too far, Randy.
well, I'm afraid I have to leave.
Are you going to? I know you need to
I gotta
commute.
get out
So,
before it
okay,
gets
you're
dark.
going to scoot out. Thank you, Randy,
Thank
so
you.
much for being here. And if there's anything from our public comments, we'll make sure we share them with you directly.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Mr. Arakawa? Welcome. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair Bifo. What I wanted inviting us here today, we hope that this is the start of ongoing discussion and collaboration on the Delta. It's very important to the state of California. As we know, it's very important to this area. And I manage Bay Delta activities for Metropolitan. Done that for about 6 years now. But prior to that, I managed over Metropolitan's planning and water management activities. So that included Colorado State Water Project, groundwater, recycle water, and transfers and conservation. So I come to this type of discussion with kind of a broad understanding of how Metropolitan is looking to meet its future needs. In terms of these islands, one other thing is a good number of my staff work and live in Sacramento. So I lived in Sacramento in the 80s. I have staff that live in Sacramento, so we're in touch with how the community feels about Metropolitan, about the State Water Project, and things like that. With regard to what we are doing now that we purchase these islands, I say that there are two basic steps that we're taking. One is immediately we are looking at the transition from the previous owner to us to making sure that we have all of the bases covered in terms of managing the lands, dealing with the relationships with the people that are working on the ground, the farmers, the reclamation districts, the surrounding area that we are now part of. And so that all takes quite a bit of effort and activity, and we're focused on that. We don't have a blueprint right now. We don't have a master plan. Our hope is that we can take a very deliberate approach to that, working with a number of parties, including the continuing dialogue with the Commission. I wanted to go over maybe some kind of basic information here for those that maybe are not as familiar. So I'm showing a map here of the Delta region, and these islands, Webb Tract, Bolden Island, Holland Tract, Bacon Island, and then there's a portion of Chips Island, not the whole Chips Island, but a portion at the tip. These make up the purchase. For Web Tract, Bolden Tract, and Bacon Island, it's the full acreage. 20,000 acres in total for all of the islands and lands. Holland Tract, probably about two-thirds of the island in ownership by Metropolitan, so there are other owners that are there in Holland Tract. But you can see, looking at this map, it's right in the center of the delta. It's kind of on the edge towards the western end of the delta. And it's, for a variety of reasons, pretty important area. It's area on the way to the export pumps. It's area that's important to fish where delta smelt spawn. It's in an area where subsidence has created 15 feet or more elevation below sea level. So the concern and the efforts to try to protect those lands from levee failures. We're talking about islands that are right in the middle of that, issue. And so, like I mentioned, Holland Tract is the one where there's not full ownership, and then Chips Island at the tip on the western end is in Metropolitan's ownership. Just to give you an idea, Bacon Island is in San Joaquin County, about 5,600 acres, and about 5,290 acres in agriculture. And I would say for Bacon Island, mainly today, it's mainly corn and alfalfa. For Bolden Island, about 620 acres. It's agriculture as well, and it's mostly corn. For Holland Tract, it's in Contra Costa County, and I mentioned that's partial ownership, so about 3,000 out of the 4,000 acres, and about 3,460 acres in agricultural use. There's other recreational use that are part of that that is actually not part of Metropolitan's ownership. So, but that's the area that has more recreational use. Web Tract is in Contra Costa County, 5,400, almost 5,500 acres, and about 4,790 acres are in agricultural production. Pardon me? The PG&E facility, I believe, I believe it's one, I can't remember if it's Web Tract or there's a pipeline that goes through one of the islands that there's improvement on, so I think you're on that track. Chips Island, Solano County, 243 acres of Metropolitan ownership, and there's no agricultural use or other use on it right now. So that just kind of gives you a flavor. Wanted to say, in terms of the transition, we Metropolitan have hired a guy named Dave Forkel, who worked for the previous owner. He was the on-the-ground manager for those areas, so his charge is to make sure that as we take on that ownership, that we continue to pay attention to everything that needs to be handled in the area, working with the surrounding area, working with farmers, working with the ferry authority, etc. And Dave has 25 years he has 25 years working in this on this project and working in this area, so we're counting on him to provide us solid, sensible ideas as far as what kinds of steps we need to take, what kinds of things we need to look at into the future. I would say, though, that our job one is to have a smooth transition. The second thing, though, is to, as we begin to look out into the future, to not do that in isolation, to do that with other parties that are in the area, other parties that have an interest. So whether that's agriculture, economic, whether that's fisheries, habitat, trying to understand how all of the pieces fit together. And so in doing so, we don't plan to just stay isolated from the area. We plan to be involved in working with the different parties. When we went to the board for the purchase, we talked about a few ideas. We don't have a proposed project. We haven't done the environmental how do we deal with the subsidence? Are there things that we can do to reduce the subsidence over time? What kind of farming practices make sense as a result of the nature of the peak soils, as a result of maybe looking to more wildlife-friendly habitat, if that can be the case. We recognize that this area is very important to waterfowl. It's part of the migration route for birds. It's also likely important to a degree for sandhill cranes, in addition to the area farther north in the delta. So those kinds of things need to be taken into account. And then the levees. The islands are right along the pathway towards the export pumps. And so fortifying the levees, in preparation for the purchase, we walked pretty much every mile of those levees of those 4 islands, but pretty much along Old and Middle River to understand what we have there, what kind of condition they're in, what kind of standards do they meet, what needs to be done in the future. So levees will be a big deal. And then for Chips Island, habitat makes a lot of sense. It's right out there in the middle of the area where the fishery agencies say that it's important for fish nursery area, for fish food. And so overall, trying to come up with a game plan, working with others that has mixed land uses and benefits that make sense from an overall standpoint. For us, it's about water supply reliability, as our chair said, and so with or without Cal Water Fix, we talked about the alignment, so that's certainly part of this. Bacon Island and Bolton Island are along the alignment, but our future water supply strategy really relies on protecting the supply that we have today in the state project. And the reason for that is because it's the way that we store water in the wet years, so that in the droughts we're able to survive and live off of that storage. But also it's the quality of the water that we're able to blend with the Colorado River supply and to stretch our local supply. Because with the recycled water and the groundwater requires that blending of water so that we can make those projects feasible. And so protecting that state project supply is critical. That's why we say with or without the Cal Water Fix project, these areas in the Delta are critical to our future. We hope that this is a start in terms of talking about these things, and we hope that we'll have future opportunities to talk about our broader water supply strategy and what we're doing to reach very aggressive goals by 2035 to grow our supply so that our increased demand is met solely by local supply and conservation. By the time we get to 2035, relying 2/3 on local supply and conservation. That's our strategy. It's an aggressive one. It's what our Metropolitan board approved, and that's the track that we're on. Hopefully there will be opportunities to share that kind of information with you either up here or down in Southern California to see firsthand what kinds of steps are being taken. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there any questions of Mr. Arakawa? Okay, I do have a number of speaker cards. I'll go to them right now. You're going to stay in the room, though, Stephen, until they're done, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we'll make sure ourselves, Stephen, but also if you can help us make sure that the public comments are conveyed to Mr. Record so that he has the audience, the message from the audience that we have before us. First speaker will be Barbara Berrigan-Parilla, followed by Lynn Miller, followed by Rebecca Clark, and we will be at 2 minutes per speaker. Welcome, Barbara. Good evening. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Chair People and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am saddened, however, that Mr. Record was permitted to leave before the public had the chance to engage with him. As you begin to build your relationship as a neighbor with Metropolitan Water District, I want you to consider 3 separate questions. First off, what legal authority does Metropolitan Water District have to issue revenue bonds for a commercial agricultural habitat endeavor 300 miles, 500 miles from its service area, especially considering that Met states on their paperwork that there is no stated water supply benefit? Second question I think you need to ask Metropolitan Water District. How does spending hundreds of millions of dollars of Southern California ratepayer money to purchase Delta Islands ensure the ability of Met to afford their local debt obligations under Water Code Section 85021? That's where state law requires Met to reduce their reliance on Delta sources of water through investment in improved regional supplies, conservation, and water use efficiency. Will the $196 million in revenue bonds for the island purchase impact Met's ability to meet the goal that was just stated about 2/3 local water supply by 2035? I believe it will, because Met couldn't even fund its own turf rebate program during the last 4 years of drought in full. Met has repeatedly said that the island purchase has nothing to do with the construction of the Delta tunnels. Tonight it was admitted, well, it could help maybe facilitate the process and make it a little easier. I'm very confused because in the Public Record Act request, we found a document, which is a draft term sheet between Metropolitan Water District and DWR. It was put together at the end of 2014, and the plan since the end of 2014 has been for Metropolitan Water District to pay for $400 million of commercial paper to fund the pre-construction costs for the tunnels. That sounds to me like more than dating. That's a pretty serious commitment. Several Met board members expressed concern this week at committee meetings that they were not ready to approve pre-construction expenses for tunnel planning. However, unbeknownst to them, their staff has worked out the whole arrangement on how to move forward to cover costs for the state water project side.
And Barb, you're going to need to wrap up for me, please.
So my question would have been, if Mr. Record was still here, if this isn't about constructing tunnels, then what is the real use for the land, and what's really happening with financing?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies, our buzzer didn't go off, but I've got a backup system, so I'll make sure it does next time. Thank you, Barb. We'll see you on item 8 as well. Lynn Miller, you declined. Thank you, Lynn. Do you want to speak on 8? Okay, I'll leave that up to you. And Rebecca Clark from the State Boating Association? No. Oh, it took a guess. Stab in the dark.
Rebecca Clark, California Striped
Thank
Bass
you. Followed by
Association.
Kathy Button. Rebecca,
Okay,
welcome.
Yeah, my whole concern is Metropolitan Water District, their business is water, not farming. What are they doing buying all the farmland? Are they going to flood it? Nah, maybe. Are they going to build tunnels over top of it? Build tunnels under it? We don't know. I don't even think they know. I think they're they're figuring on one thing happening. And knock on wood, that don't happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Kathy Button, followed by Jack Michael. Kathy, welcome. Good evening.
I had questions in regard to Holland Tract. I own and operate Delta Kayak Adventures, and I offer a lot of tours in that area. That's one of my primary locations. So recently, in the past 4 weeks or so, I've noticed a significant increase in truck traffic. I was wondering if there's anything going on at this moment and any plans specifically for Holland Tract.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Jack Michael? No speaking. Okay. Chris Newdeck. Following Chris will be Al Medvitz. Welcome and good evening, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Newdeck, civil engineer, Kelson Seneca Newdeck. We represent over 24 districts in the Delta. And I wanted to ask a question, really, of Randy before he left. It's a political question, but it's a question that's somewhat curious to all us other landowners in the Delta. We're undergoing a reauthorization, not actually reauthorization, rather. Senator Wolk is carrying a bill to continue our cost share in the Delta Levy Subventions Program, a program that's been around for over 40 years, that's served to maintain the levees in the Delta and really keep the Delta in the current condition it's in and flood-proofing that. Met was against carrying that indefinitely. They were the primary outspoken party, and the bill is now on the governor's desk with only a 2-year extension. So I was hoping I might get some wisdom as to, now that they bought 4 islands, why aren't they participating as a good neighbor and continuing to support that very valuable program? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's a worthy question, and we will make sure it's conveyed. Mr. Medvitz. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Al Medvitz. I'm from Solano County, where I'm a farmer. We take water from the Sacramento River to irrigate our grapes and alfalfa. And when I'm also a member of the Solano County Ag Advisory Committee and also an advisory committee to this group. When Mr. Record was speaking, I couldn't help but think of Mark Twain's quote or statement that when somebody comes to do you explicitly to do you good by fixing your islands or water, you should run like hell. And I was also thinking of the Metropolitan Water District agents wandering through the valley on the other side of the Sierra, buying up lands at the turn of the century and what they were telling the local people about what their purposes were, that ended up taking their water away and turning their land into a desert. Well, maybe our land could be turned into a swamp. More particularly, I think, in terms of the Metropolitan Water District not having specific plans but willing to spend millions and millions of dollars, we need to look at the Metropolitan Water District as part of a community of districts. It's not just the Metropolitan Water District. They are a customer of the State Water Project, but they also have relationships with all the other water districts in the region and indeed across the state. So the purchase of their land gives them leverage in that community in terms of the allocation of water statewide. So when Bakersfield population or Kern County population is going to grow, as they project, 5 times by 2040, how are they going to negotiate with the Metropolitan Water District in their water community to allocate water for their growth? And how will they ask the Metropolitan Water District to use their leverage in the Delta? Okay. One last question, or one last issue, if I might.
Quickly, please,
Okay.
Mr. Medvitz.
The location of these islands also is crucial to the salinity in the Delta prior to in setting aside everything else. So if they go to Plan B or taking water through Delta conveyance, then how they control, how these islands relate to the salinity of the neighboring water, like the water that I take, and which I have suffered salinity from. I can't irrigate my grapes with the Sacramento River water at Rio Vista because of salinity now. And part of that is because of export. So looking at that and how these islands and the manipulation of the farming there relates to the salinity is crucial. So anyhow, I have much to say. I'll say it at our next meeting, Aaron.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Al. That's the end of the speaker cards I have on this item. I will ask Mr. Arakawa, there were a couple questions in there. Did you wish to address any of them, or we can formalize them and send a letter to Chairman Record? Well, come on up. We're all here. Obviously, the audience is anxious to hear the responses to their concerns, our concerns.
Yeah, I think, one of the main things is the levies. And, Metropolitan took an opposed position on the Walk bill. I think that our interest is aligned with stable levies because with or without Cal Water Fix, water needs to move through these Delta channels. And I think the key thing is the board in deliberating that determined with the charge of the Delta Stewardship Council to develop a levy prioritization strategy with the amount of state funds that are available to deal with 1,100 miles of levees. What's the best way to go about that? And so the thought was the prioritization step out of the Delta Reform Act should take its course and then determine what we need to do moving forward past the 2018 sunset. But in the meantime, the subventions program would continue on, and Metropolitan has collaborated with reclamation districts in the Delta to understand what kind of improvements they're making. We've shared information in terms of what kind of analysis we've done with risks on those levees. That's been very helpful. That's been going on for a few years, and we intend to do that going forward. Trying to remember if there's another.
Holland Tract.
Okay, yeah.
The
Holland
kayak
Tract,
adventures.
We have no trucks going through there. That's not an activity that we're involved in, and so that's, I think, something different.
All right. I have a question from Commissioner Ferguson.
Yes, Stephen, just for clarification, when you say levees, not just the levees for those 5 islands that you've just defined, but how about the levees on the other side of the river? Are you prepared, is Metropolitan prepared to also ensure that those levees aren't jeopardized? Should you wind up flooding one or flooding all of them and maintaining a large body of water there that can impact the adjacent islands?
Yeah.
Are you prepared to take those into consideration as well?
We don't plan to flood those islands as reservoirs. That's not what we purchased the islands for. And so our plan is to protect the levees around the islands that we own. And certainly we would want to work with our neighbors to understand how we work together in making sure these levees are stable and that we're able to deal with those kinds of situations.
You're leaving a lot of commissioners here a little in the dark.
Okay.
You spent a lot of money to buy those islands, and you're not going to be storing water on them?
We're not going to be storing water. That was the project that the previous owner was pursuing. That application was withdrawn, and we're not pursuing it. We're pursuing other types of things that I outlined in my remarks earlier, and some of that has to do with levee stabilization. Some of that has to do with environmental habitat. Some of that has to do with understanding water quality effects of the operation of these islands, and certainly preserving terrestrial habitat for waterfowl.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Nomalini, sorry, Stephen, he can't help himself. Make sure we get your microphone on, Dante.
I've decided upon a fairly neutral question.
Okay, here we go.
Since you're going to be an owner of these islands with or without the tunnels, and you're going to commit a certain part of it to agriculture and waterfowl, you're going to want good water quality. Are you guys going to take a position that there should be no degradation in water quality in the Delta?
That's the state board's job. Their job is to establish what's required to protect the beneficial uses. They determine what water quality standards are necessary to do that. We don't operate the project. The Department of Water Resources does, and we would expect them to operate the project consistent with those standards.
Well, is your position for non-degradation of water quality in the Delta? You know we already have water quality problems.
Yeah. The water quality needs to protect the beneficial uses in the Delta, and that includes agriculture in the Delta as per the existing standards.
I look forward to stand beside you arguing for non-degradation of water quality.
You're using terms that I didn't use. I said the state board needs to.
I know that.
Yeah, okay.
Looks like we have a lot of work ahead of us, Mr. Arakawa.
Yes.
And we look forward to being a good neighbor with you. And thank you to Commissioner Thompson for showing the rest of the Delta counties up. He brought a cupcake. We didn't. But we look forward to working together in the best interest of the Delta. We realize that the Delta is an important value and asset to the state, but we don't want to lose our precious Delta at the benefit of another portion of the state at the cost to us in Northern California.
We appreciate the time. I appreciate the chance to come back and respond to a couple of these questions. And I'm sure the chairman would have said if he were here that he really appreciates the opportunity, looks forward to the continuing efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Safe travels. Again, look forward. Rogine? Mr. Vink. Come on up, Rajeen. Introduce yourself quickly.
Thank you. I'm Rajeen Reynolds. I live in the South Delta on Upper Roberts Island. Mention was made of a delay in, that the Metropolitan Governing Board did not support an open-ended subvention program because they wanted to see where the Stewardship Council would come or land in terms of levies and islands and ranking. And Bill and I looked at their tool this afternoon.
Decision support tool.
And the three large islands involved here have been given very high ranking in terms of where they stand for state funding. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you, Rajeen. Okay, we are now, that was an item was information and report only, so there's no action before the commission. We will now move on to item